There is nothing quite as satisfying as a true story that's mysterious and interesting, it sucked you in, that has a killer plot twist, a killer reveal. That, to me, is just the most satisfying thing you can find. I am a complete story addict, and so I go looking for these stories. I go literally searching for real-life stories with real-life plot twists. And in my opinion, the very best one is the story of the missing lighthouse keepers, and that is the story I'm going to tell today. So the too long didn't read version of this story is a crew is sent out to this lighthouse off the coast of Scotland. They're being sent out there to relieve the workers that are there, provide new supplies, and just kind of make sure everything is okay. When they get out there, nothing is okay. The 3 lighthouse keepers are missing. The island and the lighthouse are kind of in disarray. And then they find the lighthouse keeper's logbook, which, needless to say, is very strange. It has some entries in it that don't really add up. And then when you combine those entries with what some people had to say on the mainland that were watching the island, it really doesn't add up. So it creates this really epic plot twist. It's absolutely worth watching to the end, I promise. So let's get there. Off the coast of northwestern Scotland lies a stretch of 7 small islands. It's called the Flannan Isles. One of those isles is called Eilean Moor. And on Eilean Moor is a lighthouse, and that's where our story is going to be centered. But before we get into the story, Eilean Moor has some odd history to it. It's long been regarded as a place that's paranormal. In fact, on the island, basically the only people that inhabit it are the lighthouse keepers. Usually there's 3 or 4 of them, and sheep. And so sheep herders often go out to that island, and they're the ones that report hearing strange sounds and just feeling like they're being watched. It's a creepy place. And in fact, anybody that visits the island that isn't a sheep herder or a lighthouse keeper, even if they've never heard of the history of Eilean Moor, oftentimes report a very odd sense of being watched, of just not feeling right on that island. And so Eilean Moor really had developed a reputation as being a pretty creepy place. So in addition to just the strange aura around the island that basically anyone who went there reported, anybody that went to the Church of St. Flannan is its name, they reported feeling like they were being drawn to pray, that there was this overwhelming sense that you should be praying as soon as you walk into the church. And in fact, the draw was so strong, like getting on your knees and praying, that they developed this strange ritual that when you got to the island, it was customary that before you went in, you immediately dropped to your knees and crawled around the church on your knees before making your way inside and continuing to pray. So just a strange place with strange rituals. That's the scene that is set for this true life, very strange mystery. In December of 1900, a steamboat was passing by the Flannan Isles, and as they rounded their way past Eilean Moor, they noticed that the light was out. The lighthouse was not operational. And so when that steamboat finally got to port 3 days later, they told authorities that, hey, Eilean Moor is not operational. You should go check on them. And so as it happened, it was actually time to replace the lighthouse keepers that were at Eilean Moor. So Captain James Harvey gets his crew together, and he takes Joseph Moore, who's the replacement lighthouse keeper, and they head out to Eilean Moor to check on the lighthouse keepers, but also replace them. So it was a changing of the guard and making sure that everything was okay. As you approach Eilean Moor, you would see a massive staircase coming up from the dock all the way up to where the lighthouse is. So from a distance, if you were looking at Eilean Moor, it would be fairly easy to break out anybody that was walking down the steps to get down to the dock. And since the island was really only inhabited by lighthouse keepers and sheep, the crew, Captain Harvey and his crew, as they're making their approach to Eilean Moor, they're watching those steps to see if the lighthouse keepers are going to notice them and come down and greet them on the dock, because that was customary. You always are at the dock ready to assist the crew as they come into Eilean Moor. That was just the way it was done. And so as they're making their approach, they're watching these steps, looking for signs that the keepers are coming down, because on some level, the crew that's going out to replace them, on the back of their head, they're a little bit nervous that something's wrong. I mean, they know that the lighthouse was not operational, and that's part of the reason they're going out. So they're kind of like actively watching those steps. They're looking for signs that they're coming down to the dock. And as they get closer and closer, they don't see anybody come down the steps. They don't see anyone on the dock. And even worse, no preparations were made for the next crew to come into the dock. That was something that all lighthouse keepers did. They kept that dock, up to code so that if any time someone came in, they could properly dock and make their way up. So no preparations were made. No one is coming down to greet them. So the omen is pretty bad. And so Captain Harvey and his crew, they dock on the dock, and the captain and his crew say, hey, to Joseph Moore, you go up and just do a cursory examination of the island. Make sure these guys are okay. We'll stay down here for a minute. You go check. So Joseph Moore gets out and he starts walking up this massive set of stairs where he can't see the lighthouse. He can only see the steps. It's pretty steep. And later he would say that he had this deep sense of just foreboding, like something bad is about to happen. He felt very stressed out as he's walking up these stairs. And as he makes his way up, he finally kind of crests to where he can actually start to break out the top of the island where you can see the lighthouse and you can see, where they were staying. And the first thing he notices is the steel railings that line this massive staircase up to the island near the lighthouse itself. The steel railings had been bent over. Like, imagine if it was made out of tinfoil. They had been folded onto themselves. Like, pretty significant damage to, steel railings. And so he makes note of that. And he also notices that this big boulder that just, I don't think it was decorative, it just was on the island, and so they built around it. There's this huge boulder that just was right in front of the lighthouse, and it had been that way for, years and years. It had moved significantly, and you could actually see a trail underneath the boulder where it had rolled across the grass. So Joseph Moore, the replacement lighthouse keeper, is thinking to himself, my God, this is straight out of the storm of the century. Like, clearly the worst storm ever has hit this island. No wonder their lighthouse was non-operational, because they were hit with like the worst storm ever. And so that's his initial assessment. He goes up to the door. The door is unlocked, but shut. And he opens it up. First thing he does is he yells for the lighthouse keepers that are supposed to be there. They don't call back. There's apparently no one in the lighthouse. Before he even starts moving through the lighthouse, he looks on his right and he sees all the hooks where they would have kept their clothes. And one hook still is holding an oilskin jacket. And anytime you would leave the lighthouse, especially if you were leaving the island for some reason, there is no reason in the world you would not be wearing that jacket. So it's another kind of bad sign. It means that if they're not here, if the 3 lighthouse keepers are not inside of this lighthouse, why aren't all 3 oilskins gone with them? It's another sign that something terrible has happened. He looks into the kitchen, and on the kitchen table is plates of meat. There is, pickles that have just been pulled out of a jar, and a couple of the chairs have been upturned. And he also noticed that the mechanical clocks had stopped. And so he's thinking to himself, okay, something happened where they left in a hurry, because they toppled over chairs, they left food on the table, someone forgot their jacket. He continues moving through the lighthouse and he gets to their bedrooms, and all of their beds are unmade. Again, it was kind of customary that you would never leave the lighthouse unmade. You would make your bed because someone else could be coming in to relieve you. And so it was yet another sign to Joseph Moore that something had happened suddenly that caused the lighthouse keepers to abandon the lighthouse. Combining that with the massive damage from the storm, he's starting to think, something happened, this horrible storm is coming through. Like, maybe it got really bad really quickly and they didn't have time to make proper preparations. They didn't have time to do the things that were customary. They just had to kind of boogie out of there. So Joseph Moore returns to Captain Harvey and says, this is what I saw. And so Captain Harvey and the crew go back up and they kind of see it for themselves. And Captain Harvey ends up sending a telegram back to the mainland explaining that there has been a horrible tragedy here. A dreadful accident has happened at the Flannans. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. The clocks were stopped and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows. They must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane or something like that. After Captain Harvey sends this telegram, he and Joseph Moore and the rest of the crew continue to kind of search the island and do some investigating. And they discover the logbook that the 3 lighthouse keepers had been keeping. And so all of the entries are pretty standard. It was, common practice that you would mark down what happened that day, what ships you saw, just kind of basic log keeping of the lighthouse. But they start getting really interesting on December 12th. On December 12th, the leader of the 3 lighthouse keepers noted that severe winds, the likes of which he had never seen before, he's been doing this for decades, are passing through the island. And he's acting pretty worried about whether or not the lighthouse will be able to withstand this storm. He also noted that the other 2 lighthouse keepers were not doing well. He said one of them had been basically just praying nonstop. The other had been doing a bit of crying. Now, the man he's describing that is crying over the intensity of the storm was known on the mainland as one of the toughest, saltiest men on the planet, who had weathered dozens of hurricanes out on islands all by himself. And so for him to be crying over the severity of the storm just shows you how severe the storm really was. The entries on the 13th and 14th point to them believing that they're not going to get out of this storm alive. At this point, all 3 of them are just praying nonstop and are kind of anticipating at some point they're just going to get swept off the island. Then on December 15th, it just says, storm ended, sea is calm, God is over all. So Robert Moorhead, who is one of the leaders of the investigation, said that basically on December 15th, after that final entry was made, they must have gone down to the dock to secure some of the supplies and just kind of make sure that it wasn't totally damaged from all of the storm, and a rogue wave from this storm must have swept them away. When word got to the Scottish mainland about what had happened to these lighthouse keepers, the people that sat on the coast facing Eilean Moor, they were really confused, because whenever there's a storm out at Eilean Moor, they can see it because the island's not that far off the coast and they can see the storm. But over the past few days, namely December 12th to the 15th, which was the time period those log entries were made about the storm passing through, the people on the mainland of Scotland said that not only was there no storm, but in fact, the visibility onto Eilean Moor was better than it had been in years. They saw parts of the island that were only visible in perfect circumstances, meaning there was never any storm. So what the heck happened to those lighthouse keepers? What were those log entries about? Why were they drawn to tears? How did the railings get flipped over and the boulder get moved aside? Where did they go? In the years following their disappearance, other keepers were sent out to man that lighthouse, and all of them reported hearing someone yelling the names of the 3 lighthouse keepers that went missing. So pretty creepy stuff. And unfortunately, it's still very much an unsolved mystery, despite the official statement by Robert Moorhead. And so I'd love to hear in the comments what you think might have happened to the lighthouse keepers, and what could possibly explain that there wasn't a storm, but in the journal they said it was the worst storm ever, and there's physical damage done to the island. How do we reconcile that? Either someone's not telling the truth or something just doesn't add up. And I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments. So if you haven't already, please like this video and hit subscribe. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can message me on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallen416. What's going on, guys? MrBallen here. Earlier, I had been saying you probably know me from TikTok, but the reality is the majority of people that are watching this video or who have watched my other videos are actually just from YouTube, which is really cool to feel like YouTube is promoting some of my videos. I think I'm incredibly lucky to have that be happening. I'm incredibly lucky to have this page growing as quickly as it is. And I'm incredibly lucky to have you paying attention, even if it's just for a few minutes. So thank you for tuning in. A little bit about me. I am a former Navy SEAL. I got medically retired at the end of 2017. I initially started making content that was pretty much exclusively about being a Navy SEAL and my experiences. But then when I got on TikTok at the end of 2019, early 2020, I kind of just completely pivoted and started sharing stories that I was just fundamentally interested in. Scary stories, true crime, mysteries, that type of content, purely because I enjoy it. I was very fortunate that it took off on TikTok, and here I am on YouTube, kind of trying to do the same thing, sharing content about darker but really interesting, compelling stories. It's just something I'm passionate about, and I'm really happy that I'm starting to grow a platform that is based on that, because I would love to do this indefinitely. So today I'm going to be covering a very famous haunting. But before I get into any details about it, I want to be upfront with the people watching this video. This video and my channel in general are not designed to be, an attempt at convincing people that the paranormal is real or that ghosts are real. But rather, I want to cover stories that are just plain interesting. And I like covering things that are of the darker variety. True crime, certainly unsolved mysteries falls into that. I love that genre, the kind of dark, mysterious genre. And so this story really interests me because there's lots of photo evidence. There's multiple witnesses that kind of corroborate not necessarily that ghosts are real, but rather that the events that led to people speculating it was a haunting. There are people that corroborate the details, meaning the story is cohesive, that the actors in the story basically corroborate one another. And so it leads us down a path to getting to the end of the story, and we're like, well, what the hell happened? Because if it's not a haunting, what was it? Because a bunch of things happened that are pretty difficult to explain. So the too long didn't read version of this story is you have a single mom who moves into a home with her kids, and she starts hearing noises in the walls, in the attic. She can't make sense of it. She has friends and, the babysitter that are at the house that also hear it. Her ex-husband starts to experience it. You have all these people experiencing these weird phenomena happening in the house. And then, through a weird series of events that involves priests, landlords, and child protective services, they have a paranormal investigator come over with camera equipment and all that. They come in the house and they end up documenting quite a bit of startling imagery and footage that only lends credibility to the fact that this actually might be a real haunting. So that's the story in a nutshell. Let's dive in. In 1989, a 23-year-old woman named Jackie Hernandez has just broken up with her husband, Al. It was an amicable separation. They just weren't on good terms. They decided it's time to get a divorce, but we will, happily co-parent our two kids together. So it's an amicable breakup. Jackie moves into a small, modest home in San Pedro, California, with the kids. And she's working a ton. She's a student at night. She's working multiple jobs. It's a very hard, stressful time, but she's doing her best to support her family and kind of land on her feet. So about a month after living in this house, Jackie comes home from a long day at school and work, and she sits down, kids are asleep, and she puts on the TV. And she's just trying to decompress. And as she's sitting there, she starts to hear what sounds like little pebbles falling down inside of the walls. So she mutes the TV and she's listening, and it's just periodically little pebbles are falling down the wall. She goes up and she's listening, or with her ear against the wall, and she's thinking to herself, there's got to be, a mouse or some critter up in my attic, unfortunately, that's kicking some pebbles into a gap in the wall. And as she's listening, she thinks she hears what sounds like footsteps in the attic. And so it startles her. Now she's really paying close attention to the attic. She doesn't hear it again. This is the first time she's heard anything like this, so she kind of did the very human sort of rationalizing what she had just heard and assumed she was just hearing things in the attic. It's just some critter. I'll deal with it later. So a couple days later, Jackie has her friend Susan over to just hang out with her at her house. The kids are asleep and they're relaxing, talking, sitting on the couch. And as they're sitting there, they hear a loud bang in the kitchen. It sounded like something had fallen. And so, at this point, Jackie had mentioned to Susan this weird, hey, I think I got an animal up in the attic because I heard some rocks falling through the walls. But the funny thing is I could have sworn I heard footsteps up there, but probably just my mind playing tricks on me. So Susan is keyed in that maybe there's a little bit of weirdness happening in the house. So when they hear this sound in the kitchen, it's like they both instantly go to, okay, what's happening here? Is this more to do with the footsteps in the attic, or is there a rational explanation? So they're on guard. They walk into the kitchen and they find a picture that was hanging on the wall that had fallen, which honestly that's not a cause for a ghost is in the house, but it was held up by a couple of nails. And the nails were removed from the picture frame and were standing on their head, point up, next to the image, next to the picture. So imagine if a picture falls, are all the nails going to come out and land perfectly on their head right next to it? No, it's almost impossible. But sure enough, that happened. So Susan and Jackie are staring at the picture, they're staring at the nails, and they have no idea what to make of it. Susan was a little bit more eager to connect it to these footsteps in the attic, but she also did not want to frighten her friend because she knows she's living alone. And so they kind of talked a little bit about it, and maybe they both wanted to have that discussion about what's happening in the house, but they both kind of decided, without saying anything, that we're going to kind of avoid this topic. And so they put the picture away, the nails away. Susan actually decides to just leave because she's a little bit freaked out, and so she's gone. The next night, Susan actually brings over a new babysitter. It's this 16-year-old girl named Tina. And so I guess, Jackie wanted a little bit of time to leave the house. She thought that she was kind of losing her mind with all the stress of work and school. And so Tina comes over. Jackie had not told Tina anything about what was going on in the house. It was just like, hey, take care of the kids, I'll see you in a little bit. She's sitting on the couch, Tina, the babysitter, and she just like, you know what, I'm gonna go just check on the kids. I got a weird feeling, just make sure they're okay in their bedrooms. And as soon as she goes to push the door opens, which she remembers in an interview saying it was strange that before it actually made contact with the door swung open. But, I didn't think anything of it. I walked in, the sun is just fine. So I walked back out and I shut the door. But as soon as I shut it, I turned around and it was starting to open again. And she describes thinking that, I guess, the house must be, not level or something. Jackie comes home and Tina tells her about the door. And I think that Tina on some level was hoping that Jackie, being the adult, would, hear what she was saying and have just a totally rational explanation for what was going on. The door always does that, something like that. But Tina was shocked when she told her this, and Jackie reacted visibly like she was concerned. And Tina's like keying in on it, and she was like, do you know why this could happen? Why the door would be kind of opening on its own? And Jackie just said, honestly, there's been a couple of weird things that have happened. And so they talked about it a little bit, but ultimately, they both just decided, you know what? I think that we're connecting things that don't need to be connected. It's just a couple of strange occurrences. So Tina leaves, Jackie goes to bed, and they don't think about it. So the next day, Jackie has Tina come back over because she needs some more help with the kids. And so as they're standing in the kitchen, Jackie's describing to Tina what she needs to do that night, when to feed the kids, what time to put them to bed. Tina just kind of stops paying attention to Jackie and looks up at the corner of the kitchen. And so in the back corner of the kitchen, Tina's looking and she says, did you put in a new light in the corner of your kitchen? And Jackie looks too, and she's like, whoa, what is that? And it looks like there's this light bulb, kind of a weird looking light bulb in the corner of the kitchen on the ceiling, which there wasn't a light bulb over there, and Jackie says as much, and they're looking at it, and then it begins to move. Not towards them, it was just kind of moving around, like an orb of light that was kind of moving around. And now, had Jackie and Tina relayed that particular experience, almost everybody, or virtually everyone, would be like, yeah, okay, you saw a floating light in your kitchen. Well, they took a picture of it because it didn't go away. So they went and got a camera and they took this picture. And so you can see there's this blob of light, that was in their kitchen. Between the pebbles in the wall, the footsteps in the attic, the falling picture with the nails standing on their head, with, Tina saying the door wouldn't shut, and now this orb of light. Now, Jackie has officially kind of gone from, I'm going to play this rational and not worry about it, to, I have no idea what's wrong and I can't explain this. I can't tell people this without them thinking I'm crazy, with the exception of Susan and Tina, because her kids were too young to know what was going on. There's no one that she felt comfortable sharing her anxieties and fear about what was happening, because how do you, a skeptical, rational person, go to for example, the police and say, hey, there's nothing in my attic, but I believe there's someone walking around my attic and kicking pebbles into my walls and knocking pictures off the wall and taking the nails out, standing them on the head. They're going to say that, well, are you doing this? Are your kids doing this? And so the only person that Jackie finally felt comfortable telling was her ex-husband, because they were still amicable. She has Al come over and she finally says to him, I have a lot of weird things happening. She showed him the picture of the lights in the kitchen, and she describes everything that happened in the house. And Al would say that in a way he thought that this was just kind of an act to maybe draw attention to the fact that she was lonely and that she missed him. He wasn't sure if that's what it was, but he definitely was not ready to believe in anything she was saying. He just kind of felt bad for the position she was in. So he listens and he says, look, kind of almost playing along with her. He's like, let's just call it out. If there's something happening in your house, we should call it out. And so he stands up and she's saying, no, don't do that, don't do that. And he goes, whoever's here, show yourself. And they're looking around, nothing. And I think in a way, Jackie was disappointed that there wasn't, footsteps in the attic right then and there, but there was nothing. And so Al kind of does there's nothing to worry about here, just stop worrying about it. And so he leaves, and, Jackie's disappointed but not shocked. And she goes to put something away in the closet. This is immediately after he's left. And she opens this closet, and inside the closet, on every wall, inside the closet on the back of the door, was written Al, A in red and the L in blue, A-L, all over the wall. And that had not been there before, and what she believes was a response to the challenge by Al. So at this point, if she had money, she said she would have left, but she didn't. She didn't have the resources to move. And so she's just kind of trapped, and she's expressing her concerns and her anxiety to her friend Susan. And the two of them are actually out for a walk in their neighborhood, and she's telling Susan how scared she is and like, what do I even do? And it just so happens that the landlord, her landlord, Jackie's landlord, was walking down the street at the same time, and they bump into each other. They have some pleasantries, and Susan, just kind of without even asking Jackie's permission, says to the landlord, hey, there's some weird stuff happening in our house. She doesn't want to tell anyone because she thinks people will think she's crazy. And so they go into describing to the landlord all the strange happenings in the house, the lights that they got a picture of, the pebbles, the footsteps, all of it. And the landlord is very religious and is very concerned and says, would you allow me to have 2 priests come to your house and check your house out? And Jackie is a religious person, but to be honest, was a little skeptical at the idea of introducing religion to what was going on. I think that for her, she just wanted it to go away, but then again, she had nowhere to turn. And so she was like, okay, we'll have the priest come over and check it out. So the next day, these 2 priests show up to her house, and Jackie's house was very much in disarray. She had 2 young kids, she was working multiple jobs, doing school late, and she had all this weirdness happening in her house. And so when they showed up, her house was a total mess. Her kids are crying. It's a madhouse. And ultimately what happened from this visit is the priest walked around, offered to bless her children. But really they didn't have any sort of like conclusion. And then they leave. And Jackie was like, well, that didn't really do anything for me, but okay. The next day, she gets a visit from Child Protective Services, because the priest had actually filed a complaint saying that this was all a hallucination by an incompetent mother. This notion that the house was haunted, combined with when they showed up, the house was a total mess. They just said, I don't think the kids are safe. And so Child Protective Services gets called, who basically threatened Jackie to like clean it up. Literally clean up your house, but like we're going to be checking in on you to make sure you're a fit mother. And so this is a huge blow, because now Jackie is seeing what happens when you bring up that your house is haunted, right? That this is what can happen. And so now she is not prepared to share this with anybody. So over the next couple weeks, Jackie brings her kids into the living room and they all start sleeping in the same room. She's increasingly paranoid. She's overworked and she's not sleeping enough, and she's just kind of really spiraling. And, Susan, who's her friend, is really taking a notice, is noticing this. And she also knows the sensitivity of being able to really share this with, authority, because she knows what the Child Protective Services call, and she knows that Jackie is really afraid to share the story with anyone. But she goes over and she tells her, you have to call a paranormal investigator. It is probably the only group of people that if you reach out to them with this story, they're not going to treat you like they're crazy. And if nothing else, that is a reason to call them. Even if what they provide is worthless to you, that it doesn't accomplish anything, they're at least a group of people that are going to take you seriously. And so finally, Jackie just says, okay, let's do it. So a couple days go by and this team shows up at their house, this paranormal investigator team. They have cameras and recorders. I mean, they are in it to try to capture footage. And even though they were ready to listen to Jackie and had obviously taken her seriously enough that they had shown up at her house, they were fairly skeptical. They, by their own admission afterwards, after this whole case had happened, they had said that they had covered over 3,000 cases prior to this and brought their recording equipment and all that, had never once found anything usable that would even hint at the existence of ghosts or the paranormal. And so you could say that they were sympathetic to people that had these experiences, but usually either there was nothing going on or they found a rational explanation for whatever the person was claiming to happen. They didn't have any paranormal footage. So they're interviewing Jackie on camera, the 3 investigators that are there. They're kind of asking her some questions about what's going on and filming it. And Jackie had actually invited her ex-husband Al to be there with the kids. So he's in the other room with the kids and they're interviewing her, and then the power goes out, which it sounds pretty cliche, and I get that. But the power goes off and then the power comes back on, and it visibly shakes Jackie. She had been living in this house with all these weird occurrences, and it was like she had this feeling that something bad was going to happen. And so she starts acting really, really scared. And she says, I'm telling you, there's something going on with the attic. And so they kind of stop the interview, and they're like, all right, let's just go have a look at the attic. We'll go look. There won't be anything there. We'll come back down and we'll chat with her some more. And so one of the 3 investigators gets a ladder and crawls through this little crawl space into the attic. And so he goes up. And so while he's doing that, Al, who's in the other room with the kids, he's wide awake, laying with his son. He's just like waiting. He's not really expecting anything to happen. And as he's laying there, he could have sworn he heard someone whisper in his ear, "Tell them to get the hell out of here." And he has an interview he does where he describes this moment, and you can tell that Al is as skeptical as they come, and he's like, I just don't know how to explain it. I heard it clear as day, and right after I heard it, I heard a scream from the attic. The photographer who had gone up into the attic, he was alone up there, and he had brought his expensive camera, and he comes running downstairs or jumps through the hole and practically falls out of the attic, and he tells them, something grabbed my camera. There's no one up there, but something grabbed my camera. And his heart's racing, his face is pale, and the other investigators, they're starting to feel like, what's going on? Al comes bursting out of the room, and he's like, what's going on? And the photographer's like, my camera. And he goes from being scared of what happened to now being like, that's my livelihood. I need to get that camera back. So he goes back up into the attic to retrieve his camera, and he finds the body of the camera in a crate in one side of the attic. And then the lens of the camera had been removed and placed on the other side of the attic. He comes down with his camera, and you can tell that what he's just discovered has really shaken him up, and the other investigators are also very shaken up. And whatever they planned to do that night, whether it was finishing the interview with Jackie or whatever, has now gone out the window. They're ready to leave. Jackie is pleading with them to stay. Al's freaked out. No one knows what's happening. And the investigator's like, yep, we're good. We'll be back soon, I promise. But really, they're just like, let's get out of here. And they bolt. After they leave, Al sticks around for a little bit longer, but ultimately has to go back because he has to work early the next day. And so Jackie is left all alone with the kids. She is totally freaked out. She feels like the investigators had upset the entity in the house. And so she's pretty much on edge for something bad to happen. And sure enough, it does. So that night, Jackie is laying on the sofa. She's in full crisis mode. She has no idea what's going on in her house. Watching the investigators who are supposed to be investigating this stuff be obviously spooked and leave really unsettled her. She felt like she didn't have any support from Al. She just felt like the whole situation had just completely fallen apart, and she's so scared for her kids. And she's laying on the sofa, and at some point she must have passed out. And Then she wakes up suddenly and she looks at the foot of her sofa and she believes she sees what appears to be the figure of an old man standing there looking at her kids. She screams, it vanishes, she grabs her kids and she runs out of the house. The first people she calls is the investigators because, again, she's worried about telling the police in fear that they would think it was her being crazy and have her kids taken from her. So she calls the investigators and they don't pick up, but she leaves a voicemail. And on the voicemail, she's completely desperate. She's like, please come back. I am out of the house. I can't go back in. I don't know what to do. Like, I can't go back in. Please help me. And one of the photographers who was there heard the voicemail and decides, you know what? We got to go back. It's super late at night. They find Jackie outside of her property in pajamas with her kids. She's totally freaked out. They bring her inside and the house is totally calm. There's no sign of anything going on. And so they're kind of walking around the house. No one goes in the attic, but they're just walking around and it's silent, it's calm. And after a little bit of time, maybe because it was so calm in the house, they decide, you know what, just because, let's go back up into the attic and just, for sanity, let's just take some pictures and video and see what's up there. So two of the investigators go up into the attic. One has a flashlight and a camera, and then the other just has his camera. And so they go up there, and Jackie and the third investigator are kind of anxiously standing at the foot of the attic looking up. And the guys who are up in the attic walking around, they're reporting down to them, you know, we don't see anything, we don't hear anything, it's quiet up here. But like the tension is building, right? And they stop at some point, the two in the attic, and it's just like silence. And all of them reported hearing a snap, and then another snap, and then a third snap, and then silence. And Jackie begins having this overwhelming sense of dread. The guys in the attic are trying to stay calm. They're like kind of trying to talk. Oh, that could have been the roof. Oh, it could have been this. But the investigator who's down below with Jackie and Jackie herself, they start kind of panicking. They're like, hey, come on, come back down. Let's not risk it. Something's about to happen. Come back down. So as they're making their way back over to the exit of the attic, and it's totally pitch black up there, minus whatever light source they had, all of a sudden, one of the investigators just gets yanked backwards into the attic. And it was actually the guy holding the flashlight. And so they hear a tumbling of the flashlight, a tumbling of the camera, and silence from this other investigator. The other investigator who's up in the attic with him that was not yanked back, he turns around and the guy's gone. And that guy, who has not been yanked suddenly, all he has is this camera. The other guy had the flashlight. So he instinctively starts clicking pictures with his camera to use the flash. Jackie and the guy on the ground, they're screaming, what's going on? And he's just clicking pictures, not looking in the viewfinder, just flashing. And he sees one of the investigator has been hoisted up into the rafters of the attic, and he's been tied to a post, and they have a picture of it. And so they run over, the investigator who's up there with him, he runs over, he unties him, pulls him down, and that guy's, totally freaked out. He doesn't know how he got up there. They collect their stuff and they practically fall out of the attic, and it's just pure mayhem because the guy he's freaked out, he's ashen faced, he's got these marks on his neck like something was holding onto his neck, and they run out of the house, never to go back in. Jackie says that she's not experienced anything paranormal since this instance and swears that this was not a hoax, that in fact this is one of the lowest points of her life, and it made her look like an incompetent mother, and it makes her look crazy, and a lot of people still think she's crazy, and for her, this was just a traumatic experience that she has no explanation for. So I'd love to hear what you guys think. If there's a better explanation than ghosts, let me know in the comments, and please be sure to like and subscribe if you've not already. Also, you can check me out on Instagram. My handle's JohnBallen416, and then on TikTok, it's MrBallen as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Talk to you next week. A 1979 New York Times article described her story as being, quote, one of the Western world's most intriguing and convincing cases of reincarnation. I myself am not a huge believer in reincarnation, mostly because any of the stories I've heard, there's no modern day corroboration of fact. But in Dorothy Eady's case, or as she became known, Setti's case, she has a number of things that line up with her story, with her lifelong story, that She, in fact, was from ancient Egypt and was actually a priestess in ancient Egypt times. And some of her discoveries are pretty incredible. And frankly, Egyptologists and historians that have looked at this case have spent decades trying to prove that she was lying, but can't. She had information that she shouldn't have had. That begins to make you wonder, maybe she really was reincarnated. Before we get started, if you could please gently destroy the like button and then go ahead and hit subscribe and turn on all notifications, that would be great. I'm going to be posting a ton of content just like this as many times a week as I can. I'm aiming for 3, if not 4, every week going forward, so please come along. The too long didn't read version of this story is you have Dorothy Eady, who as a child has a near-death experience. When she kind of comes back, she believes that she is no longer home, that her home is somewhere else. She starts having dreams about this place. She describes this garden and this big building, and then eventually she discovers that what she's describing is a place in ancient Egypt. And she ends up becoming obsessed with ancient Egypt and then begins providing information and helping with archaeological digs that leads to numerous incredible discoveries, all from memories that she claims to have had from her previous life. Even if you don't believe in reincarnation and this whole story seems like totally made up, just listen to how the story flows and then try to make sense of how in the world she had the information she had that led to distinct discoveries that nobody else had made. That they found this stuff as a result of Dorothy Eady's information. How do we reconcile that? It's not impossible, but no one's been able to do it yet. So let's see what you think. Dorothy Eady was born into a lower middle-class family in London in 1904. She was an only child and she was absolutely adored by her parents. Now, unfortunately, when she was 3 years old, she fell down a flight of stairs in her home and was unconscious. They called the doctor and the doctor shows up and says she's actually dead. As the parents are talking to the doctor, after about an hour, Dorothy gets up and goes into her bedroom and is like playing on her bed. And the parents come in with the doctor and they can't make any sense of it. And in fact, the parents were furious at the doctor for pronouncing her dead because they're like, obviously she wasn't. If she's just fine now, like, who are you? What kind of doctor are you? But the doctor swears she was dead. Shortly after the accident, Dorothy develops a strange accent that they can't quite place, and doctors and specialists believe that she's suffering from something called foreign accent syndrome, which is fairly common amongst people with significant head injuries. Basically, it alters your speech, and to people that don't know any better, they might think that you just have a strange foreign accent. Dorothy also started telling her parents about this recurring dream she had, where she'd be near this huge building with these big pillars, and she'd be in this beautiful garden. She loved this garden. She talked about the beautiful flowers and her friends that were there, and it was just this unbelievable place. It was like this oasis next to this building. But she didn't know where it was, and she's 3-4 years old, so she's not able to articulate much what this is, but she was just in love with this garden and this location in her dreams, and she talked about it endlessly. Dorothy's mother would find her daughter on her bed either before she went to sleep or when she woke up, crying because Dorothy longed to actually be in this place in her dreams, which she started calling home. Now, Dorothy's mother would say, but Dorothy, you're home now. And she would say, no, I'm not home. My home is in that garden. It's near that building. And no matter how Dorothy's mother tried to kind of convince her that, no, honey, you live here now. You live here. You've never lived anywhere else. Dorothy was unbelievably convinced that what she was seeing in her dreams was her actual home. It was around this time that Dorothy's parents brought Dorothy to a British museum where they had a big ancient Egyptian exhibit set up. And when they went into the museum, Dorothy sees this exhibit and she's immediately attracted to it. And as she gets closer, she starts seeing the statues of the pharaohs and pictures of the pyramids, and she sprints into the exhibit, runs away from her parents, and she's running to the different statues of the pharaohs and of the Sphinx and all of these different icons from ancient Egypt, and she's kissing their feet and she's sobbing hysterically, and she's yelling, I'm home, I'm with my people. This little tiny kid is having this revelation that she's found found home, and she refused to leave the museum. Finally, her parents, get her to calm down. They're pretty embarrassed as people are like looking at them like, what's going on with your child? She finally leaves with her parents, but at this point, now Dorothy has attached that place in her dreams that she longs to go with the beautiful garden. She's attached it to Egypt, to ancient Egypt. And so she becomes completely obsessed with ancient Egypt. Her obsession with ancient Egypt started to get her in trouble. When she'd go to Sunday school, her family is a very, very devout Catholic family. She would compare Catholicism to other ancient Egyptian religions. That got her in a lot of trouble, and in fact, they said, you can't come to Sunday school anymore. Then she got expelled from her Catholic school because she refused to sing a number of the hymns that in some way disparaged Egyptians, ancient Egyptians. She was also told that she could no longer attend Sunday Mass for the same reasons. She was basically not welcome anymore. At 6 years old, Dorothy, who knew how to write and read in English, started to take a keen interest in hieroglyphics, Egyptian hieroglyphics, and she said that they were definitely familiar to her, but she had forgotten how to read it. When she was 7, she was looking through a textbook and she saw a picture of the Temple of Seti I, which is in Abydos, Egypt. And as soon as she saw the picture, it was a big picture of the temple, and then next to it kind of like the broken remains of what looks like maybe a garden of some kind. And she immediately said, that is my home. That's where I'm from, right there, Temple of Seti I in Abydos, Egypt. That's my home. And as she's looking at the picture and she's looking at those kind of tattered, broken remains, I mean, this is thousands of years old, she's looking at the area next to this big temple in the picture, and she's like, that's the garden, but where are the trees? Where is everything? Why does it look like this? Like, she didn't understand that was thousands of years ago that it was a garden, but she saw the picture and immediately knew it as her home. Also in the textbook was the picture of the pharaoh, Seti I, who the temple was named after. And when she saw the picture of the very well-preserved mummy, she was overcome because she claimed to have known him personally. At age 10, Edie was kind of discovered by world-renowned Egyptologist E.A. Wallace Budge, who offered to teach her how to read and write hieroglyphics, which she picked up almost instantly. Starting at 14, in addition to that recurring dream of the Temple of Seti and the garden right next to the Temple of Seti that she claimed was her home, she started having a recurring nightmare where she, in her former life, was in this subterranean enclosure, and she was being questioned by a high priestess who was demanding that she answer her questions, and when she refused, she was beaten. At 27 years old, Edie meets an Egyptian man and falls in love with him, but also, I'm sure on some level, she was marrying him to secure Egyptian residency, because as soon as they got married, they moved right back to Egypt, where she could be a resident. And actually, when they landed in Egypt, the first thing she did, she's overcome with emotion when she lands, and she starts kissing the ground and crying and saying, I'm home, I'm home. Dorothy and her Egyptian husband have a son, and they name him Seti, just like the pharaoh Seti. Once Edie moved to Egypt, she started, by her account, getting visits from an entity known as Hor-Ra. Now, Hor-Ra, she claimed, was the spirit of the pharaoh Seti I. She would get into these almost trance-like states at night over that first year she was in Egypt. It was like she'd be sleeping, but then she would get up and be in this trance, and she would start frantically writing in hieroglyphics in the middle of the night. And her husband would wake up and he would see her doing this, and she was like, you couldn't stop her, you couldn't communicate with her. She was just in a trance recording what she was claiming Hor-Ra was telling her, was dictating to her that she needed to write down. And it was in fact about who she used to be. She used to be, according to Hor-Ra, a woman by the name of Ben Trishit, who lived 3,000 years earlier in the time of Pharaoh Seti I, and who lived in the Temple of Seti in and around that garden. So after a year of her going into these trances and writing in hieroglyphics, she had over 70 pages of transcript of what she claims was her story, and it goes like this. Before being born as Dorothy Edie, she was an Egyptian woman named Ben Trishit. Her father was a soldier and her mother was a vegetable seller who actually died when she was just 3 years old. Unable to care for her, Bint Rashid's father placed her in the temple of Qam el-Sultan. She was then raised at the temple where she later became a priestess. When she was 12 years old, Bint Rashid was given two choices: either venture out into the world on her own or become a consecrated virgin and stay at the temple. Bint Rashid decided to take the vows. But a few years later, she meets Pharaoh Seti I, and they end up falling in love, and soon she becomes pregnant. When she is discovered to be pregnant, she was interrogated by the high priest and beaten when she refused to answer, a scene that corresponded to her childhood nightmare. Unwilling to put her beloved Seti through a public scandal, Bint Rashid took her own life. Edie's husband grew increasingly disturbed watching his wife go into these trances and write out the hieroglyphics. I mean, she's amassing all these pages of hieroglyphics. Her whole thing was just too much for him, and so he ultimately filed for divorce in 1936. Following the divorce, Dorothy and her young son leave and go live in another town near the Giza pyramids, and she starts going by the name Seti, which means mother of Seti. So she doesn't go by Dorothy Edie anymore. And at this point, she also takes a job with Egypt's Department of Antiquities, and she begins a very lengthy and highly successful career in Egyptology. For nearly 20 years, Seti would research almost exclusively the temple of Seti I and learn everything about not only the temple but the people who lived there, because it was where she believed she used to live. But it wouldn't be until 1952, when she's almost in her 50s, that she finally actually steps foot in Abydos. And it was because of a job transfer that put her there. And in fact, she took a pay cut to get this job. She was so desperate to just finally step foot in the place that she believed was her old home. As soon as she walked into the temple, the first thing she says is, "It's as if I've lived here before." And she quickly sets up a office in one of the temple rooms and spends almost all of her time there. And she even befriends a cobra and feeds the cobra daily, and just has this cobra friend that just hangs out with her, which no one could make any sense of. Lots of rumors swirled around whether this woman was sane, but because her contributions to Egyptology were so pronounced and so useful, that she was very highly regarded. But of all of her accomplishments, of all of the things that she did, the thing that she is most known for is when she was able, as soon as she got to the temple of Seti I, identify exactly where the garden was. For Seti, she'd been having dreams of this garden her whole life. And so she very quickly said, "If you dig here, you're going to find this garden." And sure enough, they dug down and there was the garden. And in fact, she had described the layout of the garden, what trees were where, what types of trees were there, and it was all confirmed. And once they dug it up, she was also instrumental in identifying where to dig on the north side of the temple, where she said there was a tunnel that ran underneath. It was a secret tunnel. And sure enough, they dug down, there was the tunnel. That was something that they had never seen before. Only she knew about it, and there was no way she would have known about it without prior knowledge. In addition, she also pointed researchers to search in a specific area, in an area known as the Valley of the Kings, for a tomb, a long forgotten tomb. And sure enough, almost exactly where she described, there was in fact a tomb that had never been discovered before. As much as other Egyptologists did not want to accept Seti's claims that she had been reincarnated, and that's why she has all this knowledge, they wanted, frankly, it to be just the ramblings of a crazy person and it to just be some elaborate hoax, but they couldn't deny the fact that she had intimate knowledge of certainly everything that ever happened at the temple of Seti I in the time frame that she claimed to have been living there 3,000 years prior. Fascinatingly, right before she died, when she was 81, she said that there was a secret underneath the temple of Seti I. There was a secret chamber, and there was a secret within that secret chamber. But no one's ever gone down there. No one knows where to begin to look. And so without Seti guiding them, it may be one of those things that we'll just never know. So without any sort of rational explanation for how she would have had all this knowledge or understanding of an ancient culture, it leaves skeptics wondering, is this potentially a real case of reincarnation, or is there a better explanation? And I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. In 1947, a disturbing distress signal was sent out kind of in all directions, like a blind distress signal from some point in the Indian Ocean. Numerous American, Dutch, and English ships, along with other international listening stations, heard this distress signal. And once they triangulated where it was coming from, they sent out a search party to go see who needed help. When they arrived on scene, they discovered something that would become one of the most famous maritime mysteries of all time. This is the story of the SS Orang Medan. What's going on, guys? MrBallen here. I was a Navy SEAL for a little while, and now I tell strange, dark, and mysterious stories on the internet. YouTube is my new passion, and I'm going to be posting at least 2 times a week going forward. And if you like this kind of content, please right now hit like on this video and subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss any of this stuff. Thank you very much. Before we get into the story, I want you guys to be looking at this through the lens of trying to decipher whether or not you believe this really happened, because there is a large percentage of people that say this is just an urban legend. However, there is a couple details that make it really hard to just write off. Number one, you have a number of international ships and listening stations that all reported hearing this same distress signal, and it's a very unique distress signal that we'll get into. In addition, you have the U.S. Coast Guard in one of their, fairly credible publications published a story about this case 5 years after it happened. And then you have the fact that this case has been around since 1947. It's been 70 plus years and no one's officially debunked it. So let's dive in. In 1947, several Dutch, American, and English ships, along with a number of listening stations, picked up the strange distress signal that was coming from somewhere in the Indian Ocean. The distress signal, which was in Morse code, went like this.
An officer, including the captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead.
Then there was a burst of indecipherable Morse code, and then it ended with 2 words.
I die.
Then silence. One ship that heard this distress signal was the Silver Star. It was an American vessel that was kind of patrolling the waterways around the coast of Malaysia, and with the help of other ships in and around the Indian Ocean and some of the listening stations, they were able to triangulate the location of this distress signal. And they pinpointed a ship called the SS Orang Medan that was located right at the end of the Strait of Malacca, which is the primary shipping lane between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And so this ship was basically drifting out towards the Indian Ocean. And so the first thing that the Silver Star does is they try to send a message back to the Orang Medan. But after numerous failed attempts, the captain of the Silver Star decides that we need to go investigate because something is obviously not right here. So the Silver Star tells all the other ships in the area, along with the other listening stations, that they are going to be the search party. They're going to reroute and head for the Orang Medan, because at this point, anybody that had heard that signal is saying, like, what do we do? Like, are we going to go investigate? Are you? After a couple of hours of heading straight for the Orang Medan, they see off in the distance the ship. From the eyes of these very experienced sailors on the Silver Star, they knew almost immediately that this ship is dead in the water. It's just drifting, which is not a good sign, especially if you combine that with the signal they got. As they get closer and closer to this ship, it becomes creepier and creepier because they're looking up, and in the bridge where the steering wheel would be, they can't make any person out. There's no one up there. There's nobody standing on the edge. I mean, they just sent this distress signal. You would think with a ship that's dead in the water that they would be lining the outside of the ship trying to signal someone down. But no, it's just quiet. No one on board, all lights off, just drifting, bobbing in the choppy waters of the Indian Ocean. And so as they get closer, they start blowing their whistle to try to attract anybody on the Orang Medan to signal them back. They're also doing more Morse code to try to get their attention again, not being picked up. And so finally, after all these failed attempts and just the general weirdness around it, the captain of the Silver Star decides, we need to board this ship. So these Silver Star crew members, they knew before they boarded that almost definitely they were going to find something terribly wrong with this ship. There's just too many red flags about it. They were anticipating something bad, but I don't think that they were really prepared for just how bad this was going to be. So they board the ship, and right away on deck is a number of crew members that had passed away. They're all deceased. And the mystery really kicks in the position, the body position of all of the dead crew members. They were all on their back with their hands outstretched in front of them, as if defending themselves from some unseen assailant above them. Even strangers, they had this look of abject terror on their face, as if the final moments before they died were just excruciatingly painful and terrifying. Even the dog was in a position with its teeth bared, looked like it was growling up into the sky. All of them. And so obviously the Silver Star crew members are, shocked at what they find. And they're kind of looking at each of these dead crew members and they're like, what is going on? So they make their way up to the bridge, and everybody's also dead in the same position, basically fighting with some unseen assailant in their final moments before they pass. The person who had been sending out the distress signal had literally slouched over the telegraph. Like their finger was literally on the telegraph. He's the only one that was not doing this. He was on the telegraph and had passed away in that position. So they go down into the bowels of the ship. Normally, inside of a steel ship in the boiler room, it's going to be pretty hot. There's no real ventilation to speak of. Not to mention outside, it was over 100 degrees. They went down into the boiler room and down into the ship, and it was strikingly cold. Some of the crew members from the Silver Star said it felt like it might have been about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. They found more crew members also passed away, also fighting with something in the air, with that look of abject terror on their face. So all of the crew has perished in this very bizarre way. There was no overt damage to the ship. It just appeared that the engine had been turned off, but ultimately the ship had no real damage to it at all. They couldn't find anything. The crew, despite meeting a fairly unfortunate end, also had no signs of outside injury, external injury. Something had obviously caused them all to perish, but there was no injuries outside their body. In addition, all of them showed signs of rapidly decomposing. Considering they had just been tapping away that distress signal hours earlier, unless the person communicating the distress signal had been the last one alive for a long time, it doesn't really add up that they had decomposed as quickly as they had relative to when this distress signal was sent. So the captain of the Silver Star, taking into account all of the strangeness, decides not to touch any of the bodies, leave them where they are, get off the ship, tie a tow line to the Orang Medan, and tow it in. We're going to have experts look at this and figure out what happened. And so they attach the tow line, the crew members of the Silver Star, and as soon as they begin to move it, they notice, the crew of the Silver Star, that smoke has begun billowing out of the inside of the Orang Medan. And so, not taking any chances, they cut the tow line and they literally jump back onto the Silver Star right as the Orang Medan explodes. In fact, there was a quote which basically said it exploded with so much force that it was lifted out of the water entirely and then splashed back down and rapidly sank. So now you have no evidence. You have the testimony of the people that were on the ship, but other than that, you have no evidence. The ship is now gone. The captain of the Silver Star and his crew just have to go back to the mainland to try to make sense of what they just saw, because you have all these people that were involved and want to know what happened, and they're like, well, let me tell you, we saw this horrible thing on board and then it exploded and it disappeared. And so that's where the mystery kind of ends. But here we go. Let's get into what the primary critique is, because that's important here too. And then we'll hear the rebuttal, which I think is also pretty important. So people that believe this story is just a legend will point to the fact that there really isn't a good record of the SS Orang Medan ever existing. There's this one very important publication called Lloyd's Shipping Registers, where you would expect the Orang Medan to be registered, but they're not. Others will say that, well, Orang Medan translates to man of Medan, and Medan is near Sumatra, and that's where they were registered. So they weren't in Lloyd's Shipping Registers, they were in another registry. But either way, there is contention around whether or not this ship ever existed. But for those who say that this could be true, they say that, well, there's a good reason why those records don't exist, because someone's trying to cover it up. According to a German researcher who had spent decades covering the Orang Medan case, he published in the Death Ship on the South Seas, it's a publication from 1953, that the Orang Medan was transporting illegal materials, things like nitroglycerin and potassium cyanide. These are things used to create weapons. And there might have been a leak that led to the death of everyone on board. No physical injuries, but they passed away. And then also, after they tied that tow line, the materials could have detonated. Perhaps they detonated, that kind of thing. And so that still leads some questions, right? I mean, then how did the Silver Star crew not also get exposed to these chemicals as soon as they got there? Either way, it's a fascinating story, and I hope that you took something.